Hi there, welcome to Healing After Infant Loss. Today I'm talking to Julie and Carson about their baby girl, Ellie. If you want to follow them on Instagram, their handle is NotSoNormalParents. I will leave them linked down below. In this episode, Julie and Carson talked to me about their pregnancy and how once Ellie was born, she spent 16 days in the NICU. They ended up going home but had a couple more problems, so ended up being admitted again into hospital and found out that Ellie had Progeria. They spent time in a couple of hospitals trying to figure out how to best care for Ellie until sadly she passed away on December 1st. In this episode, we talk about how Julie and Carson coped with their baby girl being in hospital. We talked about how they dealt with a terminal diagnosis. They shared how they advocated for Ellie and her care, and each of them shared the different ways that they coped with the loss of their baby girl. It's a very emotional episode, and I'm so thankful for them for coming on the podcast and for sharing their story. Please go and support them by following them on Instagram, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Hi Julie and Carson, welcome to the Healing After Infant Loss YouTube channel. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Would you like to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and maybe how long you've been together?
Yeah, so I'm Julie and this is Carson, and we are from British Columbia, Canada, and we've been together for 9 years.
9, 10 years.
Yeah. We've been together since high school, and we just had our first baby, Ellie, in August of 2024.
So I'd like to talk to you about your pregnancy. So did you always know you wanted to have children? Is it something you always had planned? And how was the first and second trimester of pregnancy for you?
I think we went through a little phase where we weren't sure if we wanted to have kids, but that kind of went away quickly, and we both kind of wanted kids around the same time. And then I got pregnant fairly quickly, which was nice. We didn't struggle with that part. And then I had a really easy pregnancy, fairly normal. And it wasn't until kind of the third trimester that we started to kind of get some information about Ellie. But the first and second trimester were smooth, and everything was normal. I didn't have a ton of morning sickness or anything like that. So that was good.
I saw on your Instagram that at about 25 weeks, Ellie was measuring small. Was that something that was a concern, or was it just that she's on the smaller side and it's nothing to worry about? Did you ever get any inclination that there might be something more serious going on?
Yeah, like she was diagnosed kind of with IUGRs, which they thought, so interuterine growth restriction. So they kind of thought that it was something due to the placenta. So just that she wasn't getting enough nutrients that she needed to grow was kind of what they thought, but they didn't really know. So I was being monitored pretty closely in my second trimester, and then a C-section was booked for 37 weeks just because to get her out sooner, because if that was the case, then she would grow better kind of on the outside was the idea with that. And she was also breech, was why it was a C-section and not induction.
But I think generally speaking, like throughout that process, there was no major concerns flagged in regards to her measuring small. So it was something they kept an eye on, but no major concerns kind of at that time.
Yeah.
And then so you had the C-section booked in for 37 weeks, but then she actually arrived at 35 weeks. Do you want to talk about the birth? Is that something you want to talk about, or?
It was pretty smooth. So my water broke at 35 weeks, which was surprising. We are procrastinators, so we didn't have hospital bag packed or anything like that. And so it was quite a shocker. We went to the hospital, and then it was the next day that they booked the C-section. So we stayed overnight, and that went quite quickly, smoothly. There wasn't any major issues with that. And we had her, and she was born at 4 pounds, 2 ounces. So she was tiny, but we knew she was going to be tiny. That was kind of an expectation. I think there was a bit of relief on our part when we knew she was at least 4 pounds, because we were kind of expecting quite small.
Yeah. And I think going into the C-section, like obviously they had flagged early that, she was measuring small. So we obviously were a little bit concerned knowing that she was coming early. So, for me, going into, witness the C-section and everything, I was, nervous as well, but we were obviously, kind of concerned, but once she came out and she was over 4 pounds, and she cried immediately and she started moving around, like it was kind of a sigh of relief. we kind of looked around the room. There's no major concerns for many of the healthcare
Yeah.
professionals, the doctors and the nurses. So, there's a bit of relief, and, right off the bat, she was considered, what we thought to be a relatively healthy baby.
And then she stayed in the NICU for 16 days, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Was
Yeah.
that to help her with feeding?
Yeah. So we ended up getting admitted, and we kind of knew that was very likely to happen, given that she was born small. So we were admitted to the NICU. Yeah, and it ended up being a 16-day stay, and the primary focus throughout that stay was just to help her gain weight. She was gaining weight throughout the entire process, a little bit slower than they had hoped, but she was gaining weight throughout that entire stay. And I think throughout that stay, there was no major concerns. There was a number of things, I guess, at that time that they had flagged as, a bit out of the ordinary, but a lot of it kind of got brushed off, no major concerns.
Yeah.
So, there's a couple of things like her skin was, relatively tight and like kind of translucent.
Yeah, and I think there were things that we questioned, but it was kind of just brushed off as her skin will kind of thicken up when she grows, or that her what else did we notice?
Well, her legs wouldn't fully extend, so they kind of thought that was just a result of her being a breech baby. So there was a few little things like that, but to be honest, we got let out after 16 days and with no major concerns. There was a few kind of things that they had flagged, but that was about it.
So then when you did go home, you thought, I saw online you thought you had a normal baby. So you obviously go home and you start to experience newborn life. You start introducing her to family and friends and just getting on with daily life. Do you want to talk to us about the first, couple of weeks at home and how that was for you?
Yeah, so it was really nice having her home. We're very thankful for that time, those memories that we did make at home. But then it kind of started to get stressful. So her feeding is kind of the first thing that we noticed. So she was taking mostly from bottle because her mouth was just so small is kind of what we thought. And when she gained more weight, we thought maybe she would be able to latch better on the breast, but we never got there. And so she was taking the bottle, but she started taking a lot less and struggling with feeds. So then she wasn't sustaining her weight. So we started seeing pediatrician, probably, I think it was weekly appointments for that. And within that time, we just started to notice kind of more things that we were bringing up. So her joints not fully extending. And that was starting to get looked at more serious because it did get worse. So her legs didn't go straight. She wasn't able to straighten them at all. Her fingers were kind of like this. They weren't able to fully extend as well. And those got worse with time. And so with those things, we finally got admitted on October 1st. Sorry, our dogs.
But yeah, so we got admitted back to the hospital, and we weren't...
We kind of pushed for it at that point. We wanted to be.
Yeah, we kind of honestly, it sounds like a weird thing because at the very start, we were so excited to get home and desperate to be out of the hospital. But, after kind of noticing some of these issues getting a little bit worse and not seeing the progress that we had hoped to see, we actually started kind of, if anything, pushing to go back to the hospital. So it was, a little bit stressful going back, but also a bit of a relief. Okay, she's going to get the help she needs. She was still really small. So, the goal still at that time was to help her gain as much weight as possible. And when we got admitted, that's when it really started to become a bit of a roller coaster. When we got admitted back, it kind of sounded like, it was going to be really easy. We would just get her in and out of there. We just needed to spend a little bit of time to help her with her feeding, help her gain some weight, and then we'd be out. But, once we got her in there, all of a sudden, a bunch of other issues started to kind of come up, immediately after we got her back in the hospital. She got put on oxygen. She had ended up, for the duration of her life, remained on oxygen. And then she ended up having to be in a brace because of
her hip dysplasia.
And it just kind of kept spiraling from there. So from that time, I guess, is when, how long were we in the hospital locally here? It was a few days.
Yeah, about a week.
And then our pediatrician, who was amazing, and we're so grateful to have her kind of throughout this journey, had actually admitted us to the Children's Hospital here in British Columbia so that we could get more specialized help and support, because just the resources in our local hospital were limited. So again, we were very thankful that we ended up getting admitted to the specialty hospital, where we could hopefully at that time get the answers we needed.
So you went to the bigger hospital, and that's where they started doing more specialised testing and diagnoses. How long did you have to wait for the diagnosis to come back with what was happening with Ellie?
So when our pediatrician here had sent, kind of did some testing and sent the genetic testing away to, it actually gets sent to Finland. So that's where the genetic testing got sent. Wow. And we were told that it could be a few months wait. So at that point, we were looking at possibly a 3-month wait for these results. Our pediatrician pushed to get us to the Children's Hospital, hoping that the genetics team there would have a look at her personally and be able to at least give us an idea of what they thought it was and hopefully rush the results, and which they did. So we ended up getting the results on October 31st. So it was about
3-ish weeks.
Yeah, after we were in Vancouver, about 3 weeks later, we got the results. And yeah, it was a big change from being able to go there, and we were able to see the genetics team. As soon as we got there, it was, I think, the second day that we were there, genetics came and looked at Ellie and told us what they thought her diagnosis was, which was extremely close to what she ended up having. So they told us that she had progeria, which is premature aging in children. And with that diagnosis, that can vary a lot. So they were telling us at that time she could maybe live to 20 years. She could maybe live a few months. We really had no idea. And that was at the beginning of October. So those 3 weeks, about a month-ish that we were in Vancouver was a roller coaster, because we just didn't know kind of what that was going to look like or what her life was going to look like. So obviously our brains were racing and trying to decide what this was going to look like. And yeah, we got our diagnosis on October 31st, which was a genetic variant of progeria. So it was a more extreme variant, which means that she only had months to live. They gave us research studies of the 2 other babies that have ever been diagnosed with this variant. And at that point, when we got that news, she had already outlived those 2 babies. So with that information, we knew that her life was going to be very short.
Yeah, and I think, during that time, there was so much unknown, like not knowing if we were talking weeks or, up to 20 years of life. So there was a lot of unknown, and that's when it got obviously quite emotional for us and stressful. And, you start going into the logistical sides of things and planning what our future is going to look like. But I think, that's when we really started to realize how important it was to, advocate for getting answers. I think what we start to realize is, like, everybody takes news like this very differently, which is totally okay. Everybody handles it differently. Everybody takes this news differently. So, we start to notice that, like, a lot of the answers that we got, and rightfully so, because there's so much unknown, but, we struggled to get direct answers in terms of, like, what we could expect. So we really started pushing for, getting answers. And we still feel like to this day, if we wouldn't have pushed so hard and advocated for that, we still might have just gotten answers now. So we're very, looking back, we're grateful that we did advocate and push for those answers. Because I think, like, the sooner we got those answers, we're really black and white type people. I think the sooner we got those answers, the easier it was for us to, like, accept our new reality.
Yeah.
So then on November 6th, you ended up going back to your hometown. I think that was also something you advocated for, was to be closer to home. Is that correct?
Yeah. As soon as we got the diagnosis, we knew we wanted to be at home. We had a connection with the nurses at the NICU here. And we're closer to family. It was obviously very difficult. Vancouver is about a 4-hour drive from where we live. So we were kind of, and we don't have any family there or anything. So it was a very lonely time for sure. So we kind of pushed to get back as soon as possible. And with that, we kind of had a meeting with doctors and specialists, like what that was going to look like for Ellie's care here in Kamloops. There was a little bit of discussion of her possibly coming home with us, but that was something that we didn't push for too hard. We felt the most comfortable with her kind of in the hospital with all her needs and her oxygen needs and stuff. We felt that we could be with her the most, while kind of the most present with her if there were other people helping out with her care. So then, yeah, we kind of pushed to get flown back to Kamloops, which was a great decision. And I'm very happy that it kind of worked out that way.
Well, and we, when the day we got the diagnosis, we ended up actually having a meeting in Vancouver with kind of all of the specialist team in Vancouver, the genetics team, the doctors, pediatricians, the nursing staff the nursing staff back in her hometown, all of the doctors in her hometown. So it was a really intense meeting, but it also they basically opened up to us and said, where do you guys want to be? What do you guys need right now? Which was really comforting. So, we kind of had that decision to make and realize it was best for us to be back home. And fast forwarding to us getting back to Kamloops, our hometown, in the hospital, we're so thankful that we did that. When we arrived at the hospital, we'd already kind of built a relationship with the nursing staff and the team here. So when we arrived at the hospital, they had Ellie's room decorated for her, and everybody's giving us hugs when we walked in. So that to us, looking back, made a world of a difference. It felt good to kind of have,
it was kind of more of a support
system.
Yeah. And then she sadly passed on December 1st. Do you want to talk about?
Yeah.
I don't even know how to ask that question, honestly.
No, for sure. And it's tough to talk about, but we had, I think the most important thing for us, just to take a step back too, is again, we had accepted pretty early on what our new reality was. And I think that was really important for us because for us, what I think made this journey as easy as it could have been was being present in the moment with Ellie.
Yeah.
If we would have spent every day kind of in denial of what was happening, I think we would have missed the bigger picture and wouldn't have been able to properly enjoy our time with her. So by accepting kind of what was an unfortunate reality, we were able to be so present in every moment with her and enjoy every second. 3 months, she basically ended up living 3 months, and that's a really short amount of time. So every second counted. So acceptance was a huge thing for us. And by doing that, we were extremely present, but all of the news that we had gotten happened in stages, I think. So, this wasn't a shock to us when we lost her. So we were able to, I guess, it makes it a little bit easier, but it still was hard. But we were able to kind of start our grieving process early because of that. But we knew it was coming. So we were able to kind of mentally prepare ourselves for that. And we did have a conversation with our doctor, I think right before that, and they had kind of given us a heads up, we're looking at only weeks to days left. So again, for us, knowing that was helpful to be able to prepare a little bit.
Yeah, not that it makes it any easier, and I don't know that you can ever fully prepare. But we at least knew kind of, that we had a few days kind of warning leading up, which we were spending all of our time kind of like it was our last day anyway. We would say goodnight to her in case it was our last time with her. But even more so those last few days, we just held her. We made sure that we spent all the time with her that we could during that time.
Yeah, and I think again, in the whole acceptance piece, we look back, on the time that we spent with her, and what is so comforting for us is we don't have any regrets. We don't look back and say oh, I wish we would have been more present or more in the moment. And that's really comforting for us. Those last, few days, it's intense to talk about, but those last few days for us, in a 48-hour span, we probably held her for 44 hours of those 48 hours. And we look back and we don't have regrets. And speaking to anybody who's going to be going through this or that is going through this, I think that's a really important message. Being able to accept can be hard, but it allows you to like really live in the moment and be present and to cherish every moment like it's, you know, your last.
And I think everybody's situation is differently, obviously.
Totally.
Like our diagnosis was very black and white. Like there was no room for really miracles or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There wasn't a cure for what she had. And I think that made it maybe easier for us to be able to accept. There wasn't really any treatment for her. It was kind of, this was her path. And
so we focused on, because of that, like comfort, care.
Yeah. And I think just being present in the moment is the best thing that we could have done in that time, that we were able to really cherish the time with her that we had.
Yeah, it means that you got to spend lots of nice time with her because, you know, obviously, I can't imagine how devastating that is for you to know that she's, you know, that's what's going to happen. But also spending that time with her is so precious, because I think I could also see the other side where someone goes, oh my God, I can't deal with this. I can't go to hospital, can't see her, don't want to do it, not doing it. So I'm getting emotional for you guys. I'm sorry, but I think it's beautiful that you had that time with her and you really realised, okay, we need to spend time with her, we need to appreciate her and take photographs and really enjoy the time that you have with her. So I'm glad that you did that, and obviously you know that was a good decision for yourselves as well. And you have, you know, you always have those memories with you.
Yeah, and we look back, like looking to our stay at the NICU here, the last like 3 weeks when we're back locally, like we still talk about it today. Like, you know, we were there for about 3 weeks and we talk about it and we're like, wow, how was that only 3 weeks? Like it felt like a lifetime, which is such a good thing. Like we felt like we made so many memories there. We have so many pictures, we have so many stories, and like, how did we pack that all into 3 weeks? And like, that's something that we're, you know, so grateful for.
So how, I don't even know where to go from here. How did you cope with the time in hospital initially when you first, you know, got there, when you knew that things were going not as planned? How did you cope with seeing your baby with an oxygen tubes and feeding tubes and, you know, seeing your baby like that? It must be really hard.
Yeah, I think it was really overwhelming at first. Like especially when we first got admitted and she was on oxygen, all that happened so fast. Within that time, she was also diagnosed with hip dysplasia, which is pretty common with breech babies, but it just felt like another thing added on top of everything else she was dealing with. So she had the oxygen and the feeding tubes, and now they were putting her in this brace. And so that was extremely overwhelming. But then finally we were able to take off the brace once we kind of realized the severity of what was going on, that obviously the hip dysplasia was the least of our worries. And that was nice. But I think just being in hospitals, like having each other was huge. We just communicated, shared all of our thoughts. I think during times like those, like you have dark thoughts and negative thoughts and positive ones too. But I think sharing them with each other and not judging each other for like anything we were thinking helped a lot in those times. Yeah, do you have anything?
Well, yeah, I think like everybody copes with and deals with this sort of stuff differently. And like, I think the reality is like, you know, there's single parents that necessarily don't have a partner, but I think whether it's your partner or somebody, you know, I think it's really important to just find a support system that you can lean on and rely on. And, you know, that communication was critical for us. Like, you know, we both coped with it differently, you know, in some scenarios, and like, that's okay. But like, we talked about, you know, different ways that, you know, worked for us. And I think too, for us, obviously this changed throughout our journey a little bit, but when we were there, like we tried to, you know, there was portions of our duration in the hospital that we were in the hospital 24 hours a day, but then there was other portions when we're back closer to our hometown, or we would spend some of the nights at home. And, you know, we really tried to, during that time, like when we were with Ellie, when Ellie was awake, like we were with Ellie. Like we kind of like, not to ignore our feelings, but we kind of tried to like dedicate time to like our feelings. So like when we were with her, we were with Ellie. Like we weren't sad because like, and she made it easy to be happy. I mean, she was, you know, smiling, she was fun. So like we enjoyed that. And then, you know, when we would some evenings go home, or when she'd be sleeping, it was bedtime, like we allowed ourselves to feel things and we talked about those feelings. And I think like being able to separate that at times also was like helpful for us.
Yeah, I can't imagine if we were just kind of like besides ourselves and crying and feeling all those things when we were with her, we just wouldn't have been able to spend that time with her, or very short time that we had with her. So being able to kind of like at nighttime being the time when we're crying when she's asleep and not really letting that take over like from our time that we had with her, I think that was huge in our time in hospitals for sure.
And did you find anything like journaling, or did you do therapy, or was there any sort of support things that you found that helped throughout that process, or was it just talking with each other and having that support system within each other?
Well, for me, I think like going through the process, like everybody's situation is so unique, but like for us, everything happened so fast that like I'll just use the example that you mentioned of therapy. Like, looking back on it, like no, we didn't, do any therapy during that time. But like we didn't have the time. Like it was all just happening so fast, and that's specific to our journey. But like, we just found little things that worked for us, but like we didn't have the time. Our therapy was spending time with her. And like, again, for anybody going through something like this where they're going to have a short span with their child and they're losing a child, like that, would be, and again, everybody's journey is different, but that would be my recommendation, is like to try and use that as your therapy and to spend as much time with them as you can. But
I think it just all happened so quick. There wasn't even time to think about doing other things. Like our focus was on Ellie, and it was on her care, and the amount like that we were worried about her feeds and advocating for her and what was going on with her skin, and all of these different things kind of took up all of our time. I don't really think we had the capacity. We barely had time to eat and sleep. It felt like. Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. I completely get that. And then how did you deal with the terminal diagnosis? How, like, I can't even imagine, honestly.
Yeah, I think, it was very hard. And I'll kind of say my two bits and then you can chime in. But I think this is where I talked about too, like for us, we got the news in like different stages. So like it was kind of in bite-sized chunks. Like at first, like, she might have something. So we had to start having a conversation. And then we realized it was, something more severe. So we got it in kind of bite-sized chunks, which I guess for us maybe like helped us manage those emotions a little bit. But, nonetheless, like when we got the official diagnosis, or even the first kind of unofficial diagnosis of what they thought it was, like it was a lot to take in. But in our situation, knowing that there wasn't a cure, I don't want to sound like a broken record necessarily, but to go back to like the piece talking about acceptance, like when we just finally learned like to accept, and it was hard to do, but like to accept that this was our new reality. I think for us, that was the best thing that we could have done, because it allowed us to like really just be present and like to be able to talk about these things more openly with each other.
Yeah, I think also getting as much information as we could. So just constantly pushing doctors and nurses and getting all of that information about what was going on as we could, so we could make decisions. And I think it just also was kind of a way for us to cope, is just having that information and knowing what we're dealing with and how we can help Ellie. Because I think that was our main focus the entire time, was making sure that Ellie was comfortable and that she was cared for as best as possible. So I think, definitely getting as much information from everyone that we could.
I think that's a really good point too, and something like worth touching on a little bit more. Like we were forced to make a ton of like very difficult decisions that like nobody should ever have to make. And, it's hard to make those decisions without all of the information. When it comes to like making comfort-based decisions, like we're focusing on comfort care. So when it comes to making decisions focused around comfort, it's hard to do that unless we have all of the information. So like we were constantly pushing for and advocating for as much bits of information as possible. And I think like that's a really important piece to like anybody going through this journey. Like, like we learned that like without advocating, like things will slip through the cracks and you won't necessarily get answers as fast as you want. So
I think we were probably those annoying parents in the hospital that the doctors and nurses were annoyed with, but we just felt like we needed as much information as possible at all times. And so we were a little bit pushy, but I think in our minds, it kind of paid off in a way.
Yeah. And in hindsight, I'm glad that we did that, and we're glad that we're in those annoying parents, because again, 3 months is a short amount of time. So like, we want to make sure that we can make the best decisions within those 3 and a bit months.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific examples of what you mean by sort of advocating for her, just so that people sort of understand the sort of questions you were asking or the sort of things you were wanting for her?
Yeah, I think like just in general, even like about getting her diagnosis itself, like, those test results were sent off to Finland, and we were told early on that like those tests can take up to 3 months, but in special scenarios, they can get fast tracked to be a couple of weeks. So like we started learning very quickly that what we're dealing with is very severe. So we started pushing, as soon as we heard there's an option to fast track it, we started pushing forward, saying like, can we fast track this? What can we do?
And then even once that was put through, it was us asking every single day, are there results? Are there results yet? I think that the healthcare system, at least where we are, they're overworked, and there is so much going on that I think if you don't ask, you can get kind of forgotten about or put at the bottom of the list. And to us, asking every single day, making sure that somebody was checking if those results were coming in was, I think, made a huge difference as well.
I think the reality too is like, when it comes to the healthcare system, like honestly, like the people that we dealt with, like they were such amazing people. Like we were in a location that had some of the best healthcare arguably in Canada. There's so many specialists, and like we're so thankful for those people. But like the reality is, like we kept saying to ourselves, like, well, we're such a special scenario here. Like what we're dealing with is extreme, but like the 2 rooms next to us probably felt the same because we're in a specialty hospital. So because of that, like there's so many specialty cases in a hospital like that. So like, you kind of have to like push, because like all of the cases in the hospital like that are serious.
Yeah. And so I think we got the results, I think, sooner than we would have, because we pushed. And if it never would have got rushed, I think that Ellie would have passed away and we would have never got results, which is devastating to even think about. So I think just like advocating, and on a daily basis advocating for what we needed for Ellie, and what we got to a point where there was a lot of people coming into our room a lot, and we knew that our time with Ellie was short. And so for us, like that's the only time most parents get to have one-on-one time with their kids in their home with nobody else around. And for us, like there were people in our faces all the time, which again, we are thankful for what we got. Like we needed that care, obviously, and the nurses and doctors, but we were just kind of advocated for her comfort a lot more, and our comfort to be able to spend time with her. And that looked like asking nurses to be more efficient with their checks and not be coming in unnecessarily, or when right after we get Ellie to sleep, to not wake her up, to just wait to do this testing or to check what they needed to check, just so that it wasn't disrupting how we were being able to parent. That was our only experience to parent, and it was in a hospital, which is hard enough. And it's extra hard when there's constantly people coming in and out of your room and touching your baby, and it's a lot.
And just, exactly. Like asking them to, do their checks during feed times so that we're not waking her unnecessarily, because again, her wake windows were precious to us. And just, the little things like, if when they would have to do, an x-ray or something, like just following up on the results, all the little things. I think, all of the little things, I think were important.
And I think as parents going into it, you don't know that you can ask for those things, or you don't know. I would say if you are going through it, or you have a child in the hospital, that like you do have a right to your own comfort and your child's comfort. And there's a lot of protocols that hospitals have and they need to follow. But I think there's also like nurses and doctors are kind of, sometimes I think they're just doing their job and they're not really thinking about those things, which is fine. But I think all it takes is a gentle reminder that like, hey, we kind of need some extra one-on-one time with our child, or whatever it is. And it can make the world of a difference in just being able to enjoy that time, because times in hospitals are stressful enough. So
for sure.
I think as well, like you said about getting the diagnosis before she passed away, and then you knew what was coming, because had she passed away beforehand, you might not have known exactly how long you had with her. I think that's also really valuable for other people to know. Like if you're in that situation, getting the results is really important, because it might it might make the difference between, oh, she'll live 20 years versus she'll live 2 weeks or 2 days. So I think that's also really valuable for people to take away, that like if you're in that situation, make sure you do ask questions and follow up, because getting that information puts you in a position where you can prepare yourself, if that's even possible. I don't know, but
yeah,
for sure. And I think that makes a world of a difference in the type of decisions that you're making. Like for me, in all reality, I mean, if our daughter would have lived 20 years, like I would have been going back to work pretty quickly. But like, of course, knowing that we only had months, like I, of course, made the decision that no, I'm not going back to work, and I'm spending the rest of our time with our daughter. And I think, looking back, if we wouldn't have advocated for that, and if we wouldn't have gotten that information, those answers, like I look back on that and it almost makes me sick. If I would have went back to work and therefore missed all of that time, like I would have been devastated and I never would have forgiven myself.
Speaking of work, did you both get time off work afterwards, like maternity, paternity leave?
Like after losing Ellie?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I took, I guess, like a month and a half maybe after losing her. So we were both with her the entire duration. Neither of us really worked the entire time we were in the hospital, which we're both obviously very thankful for. And then I took about a month and a half off after, just to spend some time, the two of us, and to kind of like, comprehend what we've just been through, and, time to ourselves, which I'm thankful for. And Julie, as of right now, is still off work.
Yeah. And so I took my maternity leave, which was 15 weeks here. And then you can also take, I think it's called paternity leave afterwards, that extends that. And I'm not qualified for the paternity leave part of it after she passed away. So I got my full maternity leave, which ended in December. And then from then on, I've been able to be on medical leave for now, which is nice. I've been able to still be off and kind of cope with what's happened.
Yeah. So how did you both deal with losing Ellie individually? Because obviously people deal with things completely differently. Was there, a vast difference with how you both coped, or were they sort of similar? And how did you navigate the loss of your daughter?
I think early on we were kind of similar, and we just needed that time together and kind of just to be with each other and talk about what's happened and everything. And then I think as time went on, we started to grieve differently, which was for me hard at first to kind of realize that we're not grieving the same, and this isn't going to look the exact same. And our paths even now are very different in our grieving. And do you want to share like what's helped you?
Yeah. And I think like on that, like we've realized very quickly, even our close family and friends, are also grieving with this. We've realized that every single person grieves differently. And I think it can be hard to accept, like for us sometimes, but I think that's okay. Like for me, going back to work for me personally has been helpful for me to be able to keep busy and to keep my mind busy. And, I found little things that help me, like, getting some physical activity, going to the gym, getting some exercise, those sort of things help me. And, there's been, it's different for you.
Yeah. And I think for me, just taking things slower has helped. I've kind of started journaling, and I think connecting with other lost moms as well over social media, and people who've been through the same thing has helped me a lot. I think I need to like talk about what happened a lot more, and more like therapy and counseling wise, and taking it slow. So it's a little bit opposite with how we deal with things, because I think staying busy kind of helps Carson more. But
But I think where we're both very similar is like what's really helped us coping with this, like together, is just like we found it really important to like look back and reflect on this journey, and like find it's very hard to do, but to find purpose in all of this. It's very easy for us to ask ourselves, like, why us? Like, why did we go through this? But even like we've had a couple of letters from just discussions that we've had with the close family and some of the nurses that dealt closely with Ellie, and even we've heard from them that like Ellie had a bigger purpose, and that she taught us so much, and she's given us some life lessons, and like that for us has been huge. And then also just like helping other people through this, to like Julie and I've started this Instagram page to kind of like connect with people going through similar issues, like this platform today talking about this, like being able to even help like one person, if that's all it is, that's going through a similar journey that we are, means the world to us, because again, that is a direct reflection of like the purpose that Ellie had. I mean, this conversation is Ellie hopefully helping other people, and that means a lot. I mean, us looking back, if there was somebody that could have helped us, through that journey, I'm sure we would have had a maybe slightly easier time.
Mm-hmm. You're both so well-rounded and so like, I'm just in awe of both of you, honestly. I think the way that you're able to talk about it and to be able to share about it, and so soon after as well, because it was only in December and we're now middle of February. I'm just like, I'm gonna get emotional, I'm a crier, but I'm just like blown away by both of you. I think you're so incredibly brave. I think it's incredible that you're talking about her and spreading awareness and putting yourselves out there.
And I think like for the biggest thing was that like Ellie's life couldn't stop there. Yeah. She couldn't just have 3 months. That couldn't be it. And so for us, like it needs to be more. We need to do something with her life. And if that's, like Carson said, helping one other person, then that's what it is. But we just felt like 3 months is no time, absolutely no time. And she inspired so many people in that short amount of time that we felt kind of like it was our job to continue that for her, because that just, for me, that couldn't be it for her. 3 months was not enough time.
We just look back at like her journey and, like the pain that she was physically going through, and, some of the struggles that she had. And like, we try and tell ourselves like, if she could be, and she was still every day she was smiling, she was happiest baby, and we look at that, like if she was able to be strong and happy through all of that, like so can we do this. So, like that's really motivation for us. And like, we're still learning what that looks like. And like, it's still not easy. And some days are easier than others, but like the fact that, like this conversation, it's an intense conversation and there's a lot to talk about, but like the reality is like the two of us have had basically this exact same conversation dozens of times, and we probably will again when we sit down tomorrow. So I think, we're still learning, what coping looks like, and, how to help spread awareness and help with her purpose, whether that's through conversations like this, sharing her story on Instagram, or, donating to causes, whatever that looks like. But, by being able to help other people in some way, shape, or form, just gives more life to Ellie and gives more purpose to, why we felt this pain and why she went through what she did.
And I think it's also important to note that it doesn't always look like this. Like we have hard days and it's not easy. And I would never want people to look and think like, oh, it's so easy for them, because it's not. And we've struggled to get to this point completely. It's been extremely hard. And there's days where we can't get out of bed and that we're just crying, and it's hard. It's a struggle and it's a journey. And I think we're just trying to take as many positives from it that we can, even in the most impossible situation you can think of.
Carson, you said that Ellie was, smiling and happy when she was here. And I saw the photographs on your Instagram and she's gorgeous. I love the smiling photographs. And so I wanted to ask, how do you feel connected to her now that she's gone, on a daily basis? Or are there certain things that you see and you think, oh, that's Ellie and she's showing up for us?
Yeah, there's so many things. And I mean, you can probably talk to it more than I even can, but like we've done a few things, and like we're so grateful for like the many pictures we have of her. And we often like, one thing that's really good for us, and I think for me that helps us feel connected to her, is like, I do get busy during the week. I'm back to work, which helps me. But, on the weekends, every single weekend so far since we've lost her, we sit down together in the morning and we have a slow morning. We look at pictures, we talk about her. We both have a picture of her by our, bedside, where we say goodnight to her, we say good morning. And what I think, honestly, what's helped us the most personally is we've went and visited the NICU a handful of times, because we felt so connected to the nurses. We were assigned quite a few primary nurses. And just every time we go there, when we get talking to them and they share their experiences with Ellie and how they've changed their lives, like that makes us feel so connected to her. So like we found it really important to like make sure that we're staying in touch with her nurses and the doctors.
And I think for a lot of people, the NICU can be a very traumatizing place. It for sure is. For us, Ellie spent more time in the NICU than she did home, and so I think that's kind of where we feel closest to her. Is there. That was kind of her home, and the nurses did such a good job of making it feel like home and decorating her room and making sure we had things to be comfortable. They treated her like their own baby, and so they're her family, so it's kind of where we feel the closest to her. And I think, yeah, there's so many ways that we feel close to her now. And I think, like you said, pictures and videos. We've gotten signs from her, and that's not something that I kind of believed in before, I don't think, until it's actually happened. But she loves lights. Like she loved looking at lights all the time. That was kind of probably the most entertaining thing in a hospital room, is probably why she liked lights so much. That she would just get a glimpse of the ceiling light and just stare at it constantly. And so the nurses would buy her, like they bought her this like space light that shone on the ceiling, and she loved looking at it. And since she passed, we've had a couple signs where like lights will turn on their own, or at times when we're kind of needing it the most, we've felt those things, which is really special.
And it's like, for like signs is one of those things, like, I never would have considered myself somebody that necessarily would have believed in signs and stuff. But like once they happen, like it is incredible. I mean, I'm not denying it. I mean, the one we have a kind of a nightlight by our bed, and it just in the middle of the night one night turned on by itself. Like
it was kind of right when I was talking to her and I was having a really hard time, and so it's that part is special to kind of feel like we're still connected to her in a way.
It's so comforting as well, and that's especially something. It sounds something as simple as lights. You're always going to have lights wherever you are. If you go to Paris and see the Eiffel Tower and see all the lights glistening, or if you're wherever it is, you're always going to see lights and always feel connected to her, which I think is really beautiful. And that's a really special thing to be able to carry through for the rest of your lives, to be able to, any lights and anything that sort of reminds you of her, you'll be able to connect with her again. So it's really beautiful. It's a lovely way to sort of remember her and be connected with her. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's emotional, but I think you're both so brave for being so honest. I have a couple of questions. What would you like other people experiencing infant loss to know? Like, do you have any advice or any tips or any kind of just support that you would like to share for other people going through infant loss?
I think the main thing is that you're not alone. Like, I think when we were going through it, it was the most lonely time of our lives. And now being connected to a community kind of through social media and whatnot, it shows you that you're not the only people going through it, which is devastating. You don't want other people going through it, but there is a comfort in that as well, that you're not alone, and the feelings you're feeling are, you're not the first person to feel those things, and there's something comforting about that.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that too, like we've kind of talked about it a couple times, but there's no right or wrong way to grieve or to cope with something like this, and that's okay. Like, we both are slightly different in our ways, and I think everybody is, and no two journeys are the same. We've talked a lot about the specifics of ours and what worked for us to handle that, but it might be different for somebody else, and that's okay. I think it's just really important to really push yourself to find what does work.
Yeah. Sorry. What do you wish society knew about infant loss? Because I think oftentimes it's not talked about enough at all, but what do you wish society as a whole knew about people going through infant loss and infant loss sort of in general?
I think the main thing is to not be afraid to bring it up. Like, no, be afraid to say their name or ask questions. And maybe different people who are going through it feel differently, but I know to us, there's, I think, and I think there's an idea of like, oh, I don't want to bring it up because it's going to remind them of it. And the reality is we're always thinking of her. You can't remind us of what happened. We are never going to forget that. And I think we want to share about her. We want to talk about her just like people want to talk about their own living children. We want to talk about ours. And my biggest fear is her being forgotten. And so I think just like there is like taboo over talking about infant loss and I think just loss in general and death. And I think the biggest thing is just to not be afraid to bring it up, that people probably want to talk about it. And if you're not sure, then ask them if they want to talk about it, because chances are that they probably do.
Yeah, and depending on the stage of somebody's journey, like somebody might, we want to talk about it and we like to talk about it, but other people, depending on the stage they're at in their journey, maybe they're not quite ready. But I think exactly what you just said, like if you're not sure, just ask. If somebody's not ready or willing to talk about it, they'll tell you. Because like in a lot of scenarios, like a lot of the people that we've connected with, like they all want to talk about it. So like, just ask.
And I think one other thing is that, I mean, it's early days for us, but from talking to people and experiencing it so far, the grief doesn't fade over time. I think for people out there who haven't went through a loss, that don't judge people who are grieving 10 years from their loss or 20 years, because it doesn't just go away.
It doesn't go away, but
we'll carry it forever.
Yeah, it doesn't go away. I think you just learn how to, kind of carry and move along with that grief.
I heard something once, I think it was on a Jay Shetty podcast, but I think he was referencing someone else, and I don't remember who it was, but he said that grief is like a stone, and it was something like you always carry it with you, but the stone doesn't go away, you just get stronger.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really nice, because it's like the grief doesn't disappear, it doesn't get bigger or smaller, it's always there, it's always next to you, you can always feel it in your pocket, but it's just that you learn how to move through life with it, and you get stronger, and it almost becomes lighter, but the grief itself doesn't change, it's just that you change and you become stronger, I guess, through it. So
and I think it's very true.
And I think there's an expectation that people think you're just going to get over it, or with time. I think even in the early days, I thought like, okay, it's going to get easier, or like it'll fade, like this pain will fade. But like the reality is that it won't. And there shouldn't be an expectation that our grief just disappears, because those people like Ellie are always in our lives. They're always a part of us.
Yeah. If we talk about your healing journey, I know obviously it was very recent for you both, so you're probably still on that journey. Are there things that you can say definitely do/did help, and things that don't or didn't help along your journey?
Yeah, I think number one for us is still, the same as it was throughout the journey, is still communication. Because like we talked about, we both do cope and grieve in slightly different ways, but to be able to talk about that so that I can be there to give Julie what she needs, when she's struggling, or that she can give me what I need when I'm struggling. I think that's number one.
And I think if you don't have a partner, then finding someone who you can talk to, whether that's a counselor, a grief counselor specifically, or someone you just connect with. And I think just finding your own individual ways to cope with things, because again, people grieve so differently. And one thing that I think we struggled with, I think even more so me, was comparing my grief. Like, don't do that. Don't compare your grief to other people's, because it's not the same. And even I would compare myself to Carson, or when I'm having a really hard day, then I almost feel bad or guilty that I'm not dealing with it as well. But the reality is we're just dealing with it differently. So I think not focusing on how other people are grieving and kind of finding your own path.
And I think like it's a journey that I don't think will ever end for us. Like it's going to be a constant evolution. Like the way that I'm grieving today will probably look very different in 5 years from now, and same for you. And I think like that's something that's important for us to accept. Like we're going to find new tools along the way, we're going to find new strategies, we're going to start to communicate about it differently, and I think like that's okay. But as long as we're talking about it, being aware of it, I think that's really important.
And I think that's like being aware of it too, not just shoving your grief down, being able to sit with it, even no matter how painful it is. I know that like if I have a really busy week where I haven't been able to just kind of, I don't know, feel it and think about Ellie as much as I want, then I kind of get overwhelmed with grief and it turns into a whole kind of meltdown. But I think just being able to find time to sit with your grief. Like Kirsten was saying earlier, on the weekends, we make sure we set aside time to talk about Ellie, to talk about our feelings about what is going on, because you can't just ignore it. I think it'll build up, and then it gets a lot worse and a lot harder to deal with.
That's great advice. Do you have any advice for friends, family members, partners, anybody who is around somebody who's experienced infant loss?
I think the biggest thing is kind of what we said earlier, that don't be afraid to bring their person up. Don't be afraid to say their name or ask questions about them. I know I have a friend who I appreciate lots, and she asks kind of when we're talking about her child, like she'll ask, did Ellie do this or did Ellie do that? And just being able to talk about her, and not the death part of her, but who she was as a person, I think is,
Yeah, and I think, it's almost a hard question to ask, because we've actually talked about this as well, but like, we have family members that are grieving in different ways for us. And the reality of it is to like, I've never, like, we've experienced loss of our child, but I haven't experienced the loss of a grandchild as an example. So that's very different too. Like that looks very different, but like, all of this, I think comes back to communication. Like, to be able to ask, what they're feeling, like to be able to ask us what we're feeling is always helpful. And just like be there. I think when we look back in the journey to like, the ones that really stand out to us are, the people who would reach out and send a text or a phone call or whatever it would be, just saying like, hey, like no pressure to respond, but like, just know that we're thinking of you and like here if you need anything. Like,
and I think in the early days, just be like, if someone else is going through this, or someone who's grieving, just being there and kind of showing up with food or what they need. If you ask, what do you need? The chances are they're going through so much that like we didn't even have time. We don't know what we need in that time. So just to kind of show up with meals or kind of support in any way that you can, without having to make them make the decision, because chances are they're too overwhelmed to make any decisions at that point.
Yeah, totally. I mean, when we were going through it, we were exhausted from the decision-making process. So, I mean, just being there in some way, shape, or form and inserting themselves, I think, goes a long way.
Because I think our biggest thing is the worst thing you can say is nothing at all. And I think that's almost what hurt us the most in the process, was anybody who you didn't reach out and didn't say anything. I think that ignoring the fact is something that is probably the worst thing that you can do. Just at least say something or be there in any way that you can.
I think as well, even just saying, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you. Because knowing what to say is also so hard, because when I went through infant loss a few times, like people would say things and it'd be the wrong thing, or they'd say things and it'd be the right thing, but at least they're saying something. So I understand it can be so hard to know what to say, but I think even just saying, I have no idea what to say, I'm so sorry, but I'm here for you, I think that in itself speaks volumes. So yeah. Is there anything else you would like to share about your story, or about anything coming up in the future? Or because I saw on your stories you've got something coming up soon. I don't know if you want to talk about that or not yet. Is there anything else you want to share?
We were just going to share our interview with you.
No, I don't know. Is there anything?
No, I don't think so. I don't. We're just kind of taking it day by day, and I think that's pretty much it. We're hoping that through all this, that Ellie is not forgotten, and that she can help other people.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being so open and honest and sharing your story. My heart honestly goes out to you, and I'm always here if you ever want to message me or call me, whatever it is, I'm always here for you. Thank you so much, and I'm sending you both so much love.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. We
for
appreciate
having
the
us.
Conversation.
Again, thank you so much to Julie and Carson for recording this episode with me and for sharing their story about their baby girl, Ellie. If you would like to support them and follow them on their journey, you can follow them Not So Normal Parents on Instagram. I have written a couple of blog posts from this interview, which you can also find linked in the description box down below. I'm sending all of my love to people who might be going through infant loss. I'm here for you, I support you, and you are not alone. I'm sending you all so much love, and I hope you have a lovely day. Bye.